The studio lights drenched the late show set in a warm glow, the kind that made even silence feel electric. The crowd was alive, buzzing with a special kind of excitement reserved only for nights like this. Tonight's guest, Trevor Noah. The man whose sharp wit, calm intelligence, and global perspective had made him one of the most watched voices in comedy and politics. Trevor walked out to the familiar music, smiling wide, waving with relaxed confidence. The audience roared even louder than usual. Stephen Colbert stood to greet him, arms open, grinning that signature grin. "Ladies and gentlemen. Trevor Noah." Trevor took his seat, crossing one leg over the other with effortless charm. The interview started light, jokes about airports, touring the world, fans bringing him homemade snacks, and Stephen playfully complaining that Trevor's hair was too perfect for television. Everything was natural, smooth, funny. The kind of beginning that told the audience, this was going to be a good night. But then Stephen leaned forward slightly, a shift so subtle only the cameras caught it. His smile softened, tone lowering. "So Trevor, you've become known lately for avoiding really strong political stances. Some people say you're staying neutral. Playing it safe." The laughter died instantly, like air sucked out of the room. Trevor blinked once, slowly. "Playing it safe," he repeated, unsure he heard correctly. The crowd fell into a thick silence. Stephen shrugged, trying to keep it casual. "I mean, you don't go after politicians the way some comedians do. A few critics feel you've softened since leaving The Daily Show." Trevor leaned back slightly. "I've softened," he said, the words almost amused. "Stephen, I talk politics in countries where I'm not even a citizen. Neutral is not what I'd call that." A few audience members clapped, unsure whether it was safe to laugh. But Stephen pressed on. "But do you feel you're less aggressive? Maybe lighter? People online say you pull punches now." Trevor raised an eyebrow, calm, but sharper now. "People online," he said. "Those same people who haven't watched a single full show I've done this year." Stephen paused. Trevor tilted his head. "Be honest, Stephen. Did you watch my Europe special?" The room froze. The tension slid across the floor like a shadow. Stephen hesitated. "Not the full thing." Trevor nodded once, slowly. "Exactly." The audience murmured, some in shock, some in excitement, all fully aware something real had just begun. "You're asking me about my evolution," Trevor continued, "while you haven't even taken the journey with me." Stephen swallowed hard. Trevor leaned forward now, voice still calm but carrying weight. "You think I've softened because I'm not yelling anymore. But yelling isn't depth, Stephen. Anger isn't insight." The audience clapped, louder this time. Stephen tried to recover. "I didn't mean it as an attack. Just a question." "No," Trevor replied gently. "You meant exactly what you said. And that's fine. But understand this, people expect comedians, especially political ones, to stay angry forever. They want us to relive trauma so they can feel informed." A gasp rippled through the room. Trevor's tone softened but didn't weaken. "Do you know how exhausting it is to be everyone's emotional punching bag? To comment on tragedy day after day, as if we're bulletproof?" The room was completely silent. "But here's the truth," Trevor continued. "Growth isn't weakness. Evolution isn't softness. It's survival." The crowd erupted, applause echoing across the studio. Stephen tried once more. "But don't you think the world still needs sharp satire?" Trevor smiled gently. "Sharp doesn't always mean loud." Trevor's voice deepened. "You're asking me why I'm not angrier. But what you're really asking is, why aren't you giving us pain the way you used to? And that, Stephen, is the problem." Stephen lowered his gaze for a moment, visibly affected. "Anger might grab attention," Trevor said, "but empathy keeps it. And right now, the world has enough fire. Maybe what we need is a little light. The audience clapped again, stronger, more emotional. Trevor continued, I've performed in countries where a single joke could get you arrested. I've spoken truth in places where truth is dangerous. So don't tell me neutrality is my comfort zone. Stephen finally spoke, his voice quiet. I never thought about it that way. That's the point, Trevor replied. Most people don't. The entire studio hung on every word. Trevor leaned back. Before you ask where my edge went, ask whether you ever understood where it came from. The audience roared in applause. Stephen exhaled, trying to steady himself. I'm not trying to diminish your work. I just wanted to understand. Trevor nodded. Then here's something to understand, you're questioning my artistic growth based on half-watched clips. That's not curiosity, Stephen. That's convenience. The room murmured. Trevor continued, voice unwavering. You watched sound bites. Headlines. TikTok summaries. But you didn't watch the work. You judged without listening. Stephen swallowed, visibly uncomfortable. Trevor leaned closer. Do you know what that feels like? Spending months crafting a show, telling stories that took years to learn, only for people to say, he's gone soft. He's safer now. The audience listened, silent and heavy. It's easy to call someone safe when you haven't watched them risk anything. Stephen opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, nothing came out. Trevor nodded. Exactly. Stephen tried to redirect. Maybe I framed it wrong. No, Trevor said calmly. You framed it exactly how many people think. And that's why it matters. Trevor took a breath, his tone soft but serious. Stephen, I spent years on The Daily Show breaking down some of the worst news in the world. People forget that takes a toll. You don't just walk away from that unchanged. The audience was silent, completely locked in. Trevor continued, when I chose to expand my voice, do global tours, explore culture, healing, identity, people called it running away. But it was actually running deeper. The applause began slowly, then grew. Trevor's gaze didn't leave Stephen. And you know what's funny? The same people who say they want depth complain when comedians stop doing the exact thing that burned them out. Stephen nodded quietly. You're right. Trevor added, growth isn't betrayal. It's honesty. Stephen leaned back, visibly humbled. I hear you, he said quietly. Trevor nodded. Do you? Because when comedians evolve, people act like we owe them the version of us they met first. But that version was built for a world that no longer exists. The audience murmured. Trevor's tone softened. People expect us to dissect pain like surgeons. They forget we feel it too. They forget we're allowed to change. Stephen looked down. I never meant to undermine that. Trevor replied gently, I know. But intention doesn't erase impact. The crowd reacted, a mix of gasps and applause. Trevor continued, you asked me about neutrality. But what you were really asking is, why don't you bleed for us anymore? Stephen froze. Trevor added, and the answer is simple, a person can only bleed for so long before they need to heal. Stephen finally broke the silence. Trevor. I'm sorry. Truly. Trevor studied him for a moment. Are you sorry it upset me? Or sorry you asked without understanding? Stephen hesitated, then exhaled. I'm sorry I asked without understanding. Trevor nodded once, satisfied. He unclipped his mic. A wave of shock rippled across the audience. Stephen lifted his hands. Trevor, wait. Don't go. We can talk more. Trevor stood, calm, steady. We just did. And for once, it wasn't scripted. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some stunned. Trevor turned to the audience. To everyone watching, especially young comedians, you don't owe the world your anger. You owe them your truth. The applause thundered. Trevor continued, and if anyone, critic, host, network, asks you to be someone you're not, remember this: evolution is not betrayal. The audience cheered louder. Trevor added softly, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop performing for people who refuse to see you. He shook Stephen's hand, gently, respectfully, then stepped back. Stephen looked devastated. Trevor, please, don't leave like this. Trevor paused. Why not? Stephen struggled. Because it makes me look bad. Trevor gave a small, sad smile. Maybe it should. A gasp spread through the room. Maybe people need to see what it looks like when a comedian chooses honesty over approval. The crowd erupted, applause shaking the walls. Trevor walked toward the curtain, stopping only once to look back at the audience. Thank you, he said softly. For listening when it mattered. He disappeared backstage. The studio fell into stunned silence. Stephen stood frozen. No jokes. No recovery. No polished late-night transition. Just a humbled host in an echoing room. Finally, he sat down slowly, stared into the camera, and whispered, "We'll be right back." The screen faded to black. Within minutes, clips exploded across the internet. Fans debated. Critics analyzed. Some said Trevor overreacted. Others said it was the most honest moment late-night television had seen in years. But one thing was undeniable. Trevor Noah didn't just defend his evolution. He defended every comedian who's ever been told they weren't allowed to grow. And for once, silence said more than any punchline ever could.